First tendrils of dawn, pale and tentative, were just stroking the eastern sky when Sarah Jenkins's internal alarm clock, usually a gentle hum, blared with an unfamiliar urgency. Something was wrong. Not just the usual pre-coffee wrong, but a deep, unsettling wrongness that prickled at the edges of her consciousness even before her eyes fluttered open. She lay for a moment listening, the familiar chirps of the robins, the distant rumble of the recycling truck, all present but overlaid with an unnatural quiet, a lack of the usual rustling her perfect manicured lawn usually whispered in. The breeze. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, the cool wooden floor a welcome jolt against her skin. Habit propelled her to the window. Harmony Creek, her sanctuary for the past 15 years, usually presented a tableau of meticulously kept houses, each lawn a testament to suburban pride. Her own, a vibrant tapestry of Kentucky bluegrass, was her masterpiece, a testament to countless hours of weeding, watering, and fussing. It was a verdant oasis in a world of increasingly beige conformity, a small, rebellious patch of emerald against the HOA's rigid aesthetic demands. But what greeted her eyes was not emerald. It was a nightmare. Where lush green had been, now, stood a grotesque army of spiny, alien forms. Hundreds, thousands of cacti. Small, squat barrels, tall, segmented columns, bristling with needles that glinted wickedly in the nascent light. They covered every inch of her front lawn, from the edge of the driveway to the neatly trimmed flower beds, an instant desert blooming overnight. A gasp tore from her throat, raw and disbelieving. She stumbled back, hitting the wall with a thud. "No," she whispered, the word fragile and thin in the sudden silence of her bedroom. It had to be a trick of the light, a lingering fragment of a bad dream. She rubbed her eyes, blinking hard, then peered out again. The cacti remained, unwavering, malicious. Panic, cold and sharp, began to crawl up her spine. This wasn't an act of nature. This wasn't some freak horticultural accident. Someone had done this, deliberately, with a purpose. And in Harmony Creek, a neighborhood policed by the iron fist of the Homeowners Association, there was only one group with the audacity, the resources, and the sheer vindictiveness to pull off such a bizarre, devastating stunt. The HOA. Specifically, Beatrice Albright. The name tasted like ash in Sarah's mouth. The current president of the Harmony Creek HOA, Beatrice was a woman carved from granite and fueled by a fervent, almost religious devotion to conformity. She saw herself as the arbiter of aesthetic purity, a self-appointed guardian against anything that dared to deviate from her vision of suburban perfection. Sarah's lawn, slightly longer than the mandated 2.5 inches in some spots, a personal protest against HOA tyranny. Her carefully curated wildflower garden, deemed untidy by Beatrice, even the vibrant, slightly too red paint on her mailbox. A clash with the approved color palette. All had been sources of endless petty conflict between them. But this was beyond petty. This was an act of war. Sarah threw on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the buttons. She needed to see it up close, to touch it, to confirm the horrifying reality. Stepping out onto the porch? The air was surprisingly still, heavy with a new, unfamiliar scent. Dry earth and something faintly vegetal, like crushed thorns. She hesitated at the top step, her gaze sweeping across the transformed landscape. The sight was even more surreal from here. The delicate morning dew, instead of clinging to grass blades, clung to wicked spines, magnifying their sharpness. Tiny, almost imperceptible flowers, an ironic splash of color, bloomed on some of the cacti, making the desecration even more jarring. Her neighbors' lawns, pristine and green, stretched out on either side, framing her desert patch like an exhibit. She imagined Mrs. Albright, somewhere down the street, sipping her artisanal coffee, a thin, satisfied smile playing on her lips. Low growl escaped Sarah's throat. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. This wasn't just about her lawn. This was about her home, her sanctuary, her very sense of peace being violated. This was about power, control, and a malicious intent to break her spirit. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and stepped down onto the driveway. Her eyes narrowed as she approached the edge of the cacti field. They weren't just haphazardly scattered. They were planted, neatly, methodically, almost artistically. Someone had put immense effort into this. This wasn't a casual act of vandalism. It was a calculated, orchestrated assault. A sudden flash of movement caught her eye. Old Mr. Henderson, 2 houses down, was out walking his miniature schnauzer. He stopped dead, his jaw slack, staring at her yard. Then his gaze flickered to Sarah, a mixture of shock and pity in his rheumy eyes. He quickly averted his gaze, pulling his dog along, hurrying away as if afraid of contagion. Even in her shock, Sarah felt the sting of humiliation. The entire cul-de-sac would be buzzing by sunrise. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling, and started taking pictures. Evidence. Every angle, every cluster. Then, with a furious resolve, she dialed the HOA office number, knowing it was too early, but needing to articulate her outrage, even if only to voicemail. "This is Sarah Jenkins, 142 Elmwood Drive," she stated, her voice tight with suppressed fury. "You want to know why I'm calling? My entire lawn is covered in cactus. Cactus! Overnight! This is a deliberate act of vandalism, a direct assault on my property, and I know exactly who's behind it. Beatrice Albright, you listen to me. You think this is going to make me conform? You think this is going to make me surrender? You've just declared war, and I promise you, you have no idea who you're messing with." She slammed the phone down, her chest heaving. The sun had now fully risen, bathing the bizarre landscape in harsh, unforgiving light. The cacti seemed to mock her, their stillness a silent, unyielding challenge. By mid-morning, the Harmony Creek rumor mill was working overtime. Neighbors slowed their cars, eyes wide, as they drove past Sarah's house. Kids on bikes pointed. A few brave souls, mostly the younger families who hadn't yet been fully indoctrinated into Beatrice Albright's HOA regime, offered tentative waves of sympathy. But most avoided eye contact, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and fear. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew who was responsible. And everyone knew the unwritten rule. Don't cross Beatrice Albright. Just before noon, a pristine white SUV, polished to a gleam, pulled up to the curb. The HOA mobile. Beatrice Albright emerged, impeccably dressed in a tailored pastel pantsuit, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Beside her, scowling, was Harold Finch, the HOA's legal counsel, a thin, nervous man who seemed to exist solely to quote bylaws and avoid Beatrice's withering glare. Sarah met them at the edge of her now deserted driveway, arms crossed, her eye expression a mask of fury. "Beatrice," she began, her voice dangerously low, "what in God's name have you done?" Beatrice smiled, a thin, tight line that never quite reached her eyes. "Good morning, Sarah. Such an interesting development, wouldn't you agree?" She gestured vaguely at the cacti with a perfectly manicured hand. "Rather unexpected." "Unexpected?" Sarah scoffed. "You think I believe for 1 second that these things sprouted spontaneously? This is your doing, Beatrice. This is retaliation for every petty infraction, every absurd fine you've tried to levy." Harold Finch cleared his throat nervously. "Ms. Jenkins, with all due respect, the Homeowners Association is not involved in horticulture." "Oh, really, Harold?" Sarah's gaze snapped to him. "Then who is? The Desert Fairies?" She turned back to Beatrice. "Confess, Beatrice, why the cacti? Why not just concrete over it? Less subtle. But at least it wouldn't make you look like a deranged plant enthusiast." Beatrice's smile widened, showing a flash of perfectly white teeth. "Sarah, your allegations are quite serious. However, I am here on official HOA business. As you know, Article 7, Section B of the Harmony Creek Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions explicitly states that all front lawns must maintain a healthy, verdant appearance, free from weeds or unapproved plantings. Sarah stared, disbelief warring with a rising tide of nausea. Are you actually serious? You're citing that now? My lawn was perfectly healthy yesterday. Ah, but it isn't today, is it? Beatrice's eyes glinted with something akin to triumph. Indeed, it is now in violation of several ordinances. Furthermore, after a thorough review of your property's history of non-compliance, the board has, regrettably, taken certain measures. Measures? Sarah's voice cracked. You mean you illegally trespassed on my property and planted this monstrosity? Beatrice tisked. Trespass? My dear, the HOA has a standing mandate to ensure property values are maintained. In cases of persistent, unaddressed violations, the board is empowered to take corrective action, with all associated costs billed to the homeowner. Harold, emboldened slightly, added, The board voted unanimously last night, Ms. Jenkins, given your consistent disregard for aesthetic guidelines and your recent refusal to comply with the lawn height ordinance. A resolution was passed to convert the non-compliant area to a more drought-tolerant, low-maintenance, and, in our professional opinion, aesthetically superior landscape. He pulled a folded document from his briefcase, a thin sheen of sweat on his brow. Here is a copy of the resolution and the preliminary invoice for the landscaping services rendered. Sarah S. Na. The departure of Beatrice Albright's pristine SUV left a silence that felt heavier, more oppressive than any noise. Sarah stood there, the crumpled invoice a tight ball in her hand, the sun beating down on her new, unwelcome desert. The initial shock had curdled into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about the lawn anymore. This was a direct challenge, an invasion, and Sarah Jenkins, who had always valued her quiet independence, was not about to back down. Her first move was practical, if painful. She needed to assess the damage, understand the scale of the enemy. She ventured closer to the cacti, a morbid fascination drawing her in. The needles were indeed formidable, some thin and hair-like, others thick and vicious, tipped with barbs. She tried to gingerly pull one out, wincing as a tiny, almost invisible, spine embedded itself in her finger. Beatrice had been right about the glochids. This wasn't going to be a simple gardening task. The afternoon was a blur of frantic phone calls. She called a landscaper explaining the bizarre situation. The man on the other end chuckled, then grew serious. Cacti removal, ma'am? From a whole lawn? That's specialized work and dangerous. Those things need special equipment, protective gear. Not to mention, if they were planted, you're looking at roots. It's not just surface level. He quoted a price that made her jaw drop. Thousands. More than she had in her emergency fund, certainly more than she was willing to pay to fix something that wasn't her fault. Next, she called a lawyer. A young, earnest-sounding man named Ethan. Vance, whose voice betrayed his recent law school graduation, he listened patiently, then stammered, Cactus installation? By an HOA? Ms. Jenkins, that's highly unusual. Potentially a clear case of trespass and property damage. But HOAs often have broad powers enshrined in their covenants, conditions, and restrictions. We'd need to review your specific CCRs very carefully, and then assess whether their corrective action falls within their legal scope, or if it constitutes an overreach or even malicious intent. His voice grew more confident as he talked about litigation, but the cost, again, was prohibitive. A retainer of several $1,000s just to start the process. Sarah felt a cold dread settle in. Beatrice had clearly thought this through, banking on Sarah's inability or unwillingness to fight back financially. As evening approached, Sarah retreated indoors, the curtains drawn against the humiliating spectacle outside. She paced her living room, her mind racing. She couldn't afford a professional removal. She couldn't afford a drawn-out legal battle, but she refused to live with a cactus lawn, and she absolutely refused to pay Beatrice Albright for the privilege. Then, a flicker of an idea. A wild, desperate thought. If the HOA was using their bylaws as a weapon, perhaps she could use them as well. She pulled out the thick, intimidating binder of Harmony Creek CCRs that every homeowner received upon moving in. Dusting it off, she began to pore over the dense legalistic jargon, her brow furrowed in concentration. Article by article, section by section she read, highlighting, underlining, scribbling notes in the margins. Her eyes scanned for loopholes, for inconsistencies, for any clause that could be twisted, reinterpreted, or exploited. Hours passed. The streetlights outside cast long shadows. Her eyes burned. Her head ached, but she pressed on. Most of it was boilerplate, confirming Beatrice's iron grip on the community. Until she hit Article 12, Community Aesthetics and Special Provisions. For common areas. Her breath hitched. Common areas. The thought had been nagging at her. The HOA had landscaped her private property. But did they have the right to claim private property as a common area just to justify their actions? She read on, her heart beginning to pound. Article 12, Section C, Maintenance of Community Features stated, the association shall be responsible for the maintenance, repair, and replacement of all landscaping and features located within the designated common areas, including but not limited to the main entrance park, the community clubhouse grounds, and the perimeter greenbelts. And then the critical line, buried deep in subsection 2, any alterations to existing common area landscaping or proposals for new common area landscaping projects must be approved by a 2/3 majority vote of the general membership at a duly called meeting following a period of public comment and a comprehensive environmental impact assessment. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Sarah's face. Beatrice had called her lawn drought-tolerant and greener, implying it was a community improvement. She had even said, "It's about sustainability, Sarah." But if it was a community feature, or a greener solution that benefited the community, then it should have been treated like a common area alteration. And common area alterations required a 2/3 majority vote of all homeowners, plus a public comment period and an environmental impact assessment, none of which had happened. Beatrice had cited a clause about corrective action on private property, but she had also explicitly framed the cactus installation as a greener solution for sustainability and uniformity, language typically applied to community-wide initiatives or common areas. If she argued that the new cactus lawn was for the community's benefit, sustainability, aesthetic uniformity for the entire neighborhood, then it should have gone through the common area approval process. If it was just for her specific property, violation, then the greener solution argument was a smokescreen for malicious intent and trespass. Beatrice couldn't have it both ways. This was it, her loophole, her counterattack. The next morning, Sarah didn't call the HOA. She didn't call a lawyer. She called Martha Rodriguez, a retired librarian who lived across the street and, more importantly, had a notorious reputation for meticulously archiving every single piece of HOA documentation ever distributed. Martha was the unofficial historian of Harmony Creek's grievances. "Martha, it's Sarah Jenkins," she said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "I need your help. Do you have a copy of the agenda and minutes from last night's HOA board meeting? And anything at all, about a comprehensive environmental impact assessment regarding landscaping changes?" There was a pause. Then, Martha's crisp, no-nonsense voice. "The cactus, dear? Yes, I saw it. Appalling. Give me 10 minutes. I knew Beatrice was up to something." True to her word, 10 minutes later, Martha was at Sarah's door, a thick file folder clutched in her hand. Inside were copies of every HOA meeting agenda, every set of minutes, every newsletter dating back a decade. Together, they combed through the documents. Not a single mention of a two-thirds vote, a public comment period, or an environmental impact assessment for the Cactus conversion project. The resolution Harold Finch had handed her was for a board vote, not a general membership. Vote. Bingo, Sarah whispered, her finger tracing the words in Article 12. She bypassed the general membership. She called this a sustainability measure, but if it was truly for the community's benefit, it should have been approved by everyone. Martha's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. Clever, Sarah. Very clever. Beatrice always overreaches, and she always leaves a paper trail. Now, what's your plan? Sarah smiled, a genuine predatory smile that hadn't touched her lips in days. My plan, Martha, is to call an emergency general membership meeting, and I'm going to expose Beatrice Albright's illegal overreach to every single homeowner in Harmony Creek. The thought of standing before her neighbors, before Beatrice herself, filled her with a terrifying surge of adrenaline. She had never been one for public speaking, let alone public confrontation, but the image of her cactus-infested lawn, the stinging memory of Beatrice's smirk, fueled her. This wasn't just about winning. It was about proving a point. That afternoon, Sarah crafted a carefully worded notice, citing the relevant articles of the CCRs and demanding an emergency meeting. She cited the HOA's own language about sustainability and community aesthetics as the basis for her argument that her lawn, if deemed a community improvement, required general membership approval. She had it hand-delivered to every house, in Harmony Creek, slipping it under doors, taping it to mailboxes. She knew the notice would send ripples of curiosity, if not outright alarm, through the community. The day of the emergency meeting arrived 3 days later. The Harmony Creek Community Clubhouse meeting room, usually sparsely populated for HOA gatherings, was packed. Whispers buzzed through the room. Neighbors eyed Sarah with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Beatrice Albright sat at the head of the long table, flanked by Harold Finch and the rest of the HOA board, her expression carefully neutral, but a subtle tension in her jaw betrayed her unease. Sarah stood, her legs trembling, clutching her highlighted CCR binder. She took a deep breath, looking out at the faces, some familiar, some strangers. She locked eyes with Beatrice, then began to speak, her voice surprisingly steady. She started not with anger, but with the facts, methodically laying out Beatrice's actions, then systematically dissecting the bylaws, revealing the inconsistencies and the blatant disregard for the general membership's rights. Beatrice Albright and the HOA board, Sarah concluded, her voice rising, did not just trespass on my property and destroy my lawn. They circumvented our own established rules. If they can declare my private property a community improvement and install a cactus farm without a vote, what stops them from doing the same to your pool, your patio? The silence that followed the secretary's stunned pronouncement was thick enough to cut with a knife. Beatrice Albright, typically a statue of rigid composure, seemed to deflate, her shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. Her eyes, usually sharp and assessing, were wide with a rare, raw humiliation. Harold Finch, beside her, looked like a panicked rabbit caught in a spotlight. The rest of the board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Beatrice's gaze, now a source of palpable, radiating fury. Then a quiet buzz started, growing quickly into a murmur. Neighbors, who moments ago had been hesitant to even meet Sarah's eye, now turned to her with hesitant smiles, some even offering small, congratulatory nods. Old Mr. Henderson gave her a shaky thumbs up from his seat. Martha Rodriguez, beaming, made her way through the throng to Sarah's side, squeezing her arm. "Well done, dear," she whispered, her voice brimming with pride. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline, a heady mix of triumph and exhaustion. She had done it. She had faced down. Beatrice Albright exposed her and won. But even as the relief washed over her, a prickle of unease remained. Beatrice's silence was more unsettling than any outburst. A predator, wounded, doesn't rage. It retreats to plot. Beatrice, without a word, rose from the table. Her movement was stiff, almost robotic. She gathered her briefcase, her gaze sweeping over the room, landing on Sarah for a chilling instant. There was no anger there now, just a cold, calculating emptiness that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Then, with Harold scurrying behind her, she exited the clubhouse, leaving behind a sudden collective exhalation of breath. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from Harmony Creek. Over the next few days, Sarah experienced the strange aftermath of her victory. The neighbors, once wary, now approached her with newfound friendliness. Mrs. Peterson from next door brought over a homemade apple pie. The young couple across the street, the Millers, offered to help her with any future yard work once the cacti were gone. Harmony Creek, it seemed, was tentatively beginning to shed its fear. The HOA, under a hastily appointed interim board, moved with uncharacteristic speed. A crew arrived the following morning, a specialized team indeed, clad in thick leather gloves and protective gear. The removal was brutal, a slow, methodical assault on the spiny invaders, the air filled with the earthy scent of disturbed soil, and the occasional faint, almost musical thwack as a particularly stubborn root gave way. By the end of the week, the last of the cacti were gone, hauled away in giant industrial bags, leaving behind a scarred, barren expanse of earth where her lush lawn had been. It was a hollow victory for now. The ground was churned, patchy with exposed clay, and studded with countless tiny broken spines that glittered like malevolent dust. It looked worse, in a way, than the cacti. But it was her barren patch, awaiting her choice of green. The HOA then sent a landscaping company, as per the vote, to lay down new sod. It was basic, cheap fescue, nothing like her Kentucky bluegrass, but it was green, a clean slate. Sarah watched them work, a small, grim smile on her face. Phase 1 was complete, but as the days turned into a week, an unsettling pattern began to emerge. It started subtly. Sarah's online grocery orders, which had always been delivered reliably, began arriving with missing items or were delayed by hours. Her mail was sometimes delivered to the wrong house, or arrived torn open. Minor annoyances, easily dismissed as coincidences. Then, the whispers started. She overheard snippets in the grocery store. "Did you hear about Sarah Jenkins? Apparently her house isn't even up to code." Or, from the community message board, a cryptic post from an anonymous user. "Some people just don't belong in Harmony Creek. They disturb the peace, they cause trouble. You know who I mean." Her car, usually spotless, began to accumulate inexplicable scratches. Her sprinkler system, which had worked flawlessly for years, suddenly developed a series of baffling leaks, sending geysers of water onto her new sod. These were small things, easily attributed to bad luck, but collectively they began to weave a tapestry of unease. One morning, she woke to a chilling discovery. Her beloved prize-winning hybrid tea roses, the ones she had carefully cultivated. For years, the ones Beatrice had once complained were too ostentatious, had been brutally pruned. Not just a trim, but hacked back to mere stumps, their budding flowers gone, their leaves shredded. It was precise, targeted, and devastating. This wasn't bad luck. This was deliberate. And it was personal. Sarah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was Beatrice. This was her new form of retaliation, a shadow war, waged through 1,000 tiny insidious acts designed to undermine her, to fray her nerves, to make her feel unsafe in her own home. Beatrice hadn't just lost the board. She had lost face, and that, Sarah realized, was far more dangerous. Later that day, as Sarah surveyed the ruins of her rose garden, a pristine white envelope appeared tucked neatly into her mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA. It was a single, elegant card printed with a delicate floral border. Inside, in elegant handwritten script, were just 3 words: "Enjoy your new thorns." No signature, no return address, just the faint, sickly sweet scent of a desert bloom clinging to the paper. Sarah crumpled the card in her hand, her gaze flicking to Beatrice's house down the street. The curtain in her living room window twitched. Beatrice was watching. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The crumpled card, "Enjoy your new thorns," felt like a physical sting in Sarah's hand. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A declaration of a new kind of war, fought not with bylaws and votes, but with insidious personal attacks. Beatrice, Albright, humiliated but unbroken, had retreated into the shadows, a venomous spider weaving a web of petty sabotage. The twitch of the curtain in Beatrice's window confirmed it. This wasn't bad luck. This was calculated malice. Sarah tossed the card onto the scarred remains of her rose bed, the delicate script an ironic counterpoint to the brutalized stems. Her initial response was a cold, simmering rage, but beneath it, a more practical mind began to surface. She couldn't fight a ghost. She needed to expose Beatrice's hand, to catch her in the act. Whispers and minor inconveniences were impossible to pin down, easy to dismiss. But slashed tires or poisoned plants were concrete. They required proof. Her first call was to the Millers, the young couple across the street who had offered help. Mark Miller, a self-proclaimed tech enthusiast, answered on the second ring. "Sarah, everything all right?" he asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Not exactly, Mark," Sarah said, trying to keep her tone even. "I need your tech expertise. I need to install some security cameras, discreet ones, covering my property, especially the front yard and the perimeter." Mark was intrigued. Subtle surveillance, got it? You think someone's been messing with your stuff?" "I don't think, Mark." "I know," Sarah replied, glancing at her mutilated roses. "And I know who." She didn't need to say Beatrice Albright's name. In Harmony Creek, some things were understood. Mark arrived that evening, a toolbox clanking, his face serious. Together they mapped out strategic camera placements. Tiny, high-definition lenses tucked beneath the eaves, hidden within the new, sparse shrubs near the driveway, even one cleverly disguised as a bird feeder near the rose garden. He showed her how to access the live feeds on her phone, how to set up motion detection alerts. "They're pretty sensitive," he explained. "Even a squirrel will set them off, but you'll get used to it. And the footage is stored securely off-site." As the cameras went up, Sarah felt a small measure of control return. She was no longer just a victim waiting for the next attack. She was watching, waiting. The shadow war was about to get a lot more brightly lit. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. Sarah found herself constantly checking her phone, the stream of squirrel and stray cat alerts a strange comfort. She replanted her roses, choosing hardier, thornier varieties, almost as a defiant gesture. She meticulously watered her new fescue. Lawn, determined to make it lush again, to erase the memory of the cacti. Then, the incidents escalated. One afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up to her driveway. A brand new, expensive-looking barbecue grill was unloaded. "Sign here, ma'am," the driver said. "I didn't order a grill," Sarah said, confused. The driver shrugged, pointing to the name on the delivery slip. "Says Sarah Jenkins, 142 Elmwood Drive." Sarah signed, knowing instinctively this was another of Beatrice's tricks. The grill, too large for her small patio, sat like an absurd monument to Beatrice's petty tyranny. A few hours later, another truck arrived to pick it up, citing a delivery error, humiliating, designed to waste her time and make her look foolish. The following night, a motion alert pinged on her phone. Sarah's heart pounded as she tapped the screen. It was blurry at first, then resolved into the shadowy figure of a person near her. Mailbox. They bent down, fumbling with something, then straightened and hurried away. The footage was too dark, too grainy to identify them clearly, but the shape was familiar. The way they moved. Beatrice. Sarah knew it. The next morning, her mailbox flag was broken, snapped clean off, and the mail inside was gone. Not stolen, but simply vanished. Sarah reported it, but the Postal Service could do little without concrete proof. The attacks, subtle at first, were growing bolder, more frequent. Her car tires were not slashed but slowly deflated overnight, just enough to be noticeable, but not enough for her to easily prove malicious intent. Her trash cans were repeatedly overturned, their contents scattered across her newly sodded lawn. Each incident was a tiny cut, designed to bleed her dry, to wear her down. She confided in Martha Rodriguez. Martha listened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "She's trying to isolate you, dear. Make you feel crazy, make you feel like everyone's against you." "Well, it's working," Sarah admitted, exhaustion creeping into her voice. "I feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder." "Then we fight back," Martha declared, her eyes twinkling behind her glasses. "Two can play at this game. Beatrice thinks she's untouchable. She always has." Martha leaned in, her voice dropping. "Did you know? Back when she was just a board member, she tried to get Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning gnome collection declared a visual nuisance. She almost succeeded, too, until I found a clause in the original charter about artistic expression." Sarah managed a weak smile. "So, what's our move?" "We don't just wait for her to attack," Martha said. "We create an opportunity, something she can't resist, and something the cameras will definitely catch." Together they hatched a plan, drawing on Martha's intimate knowledge of Beatrice's psychology. Beatrice thrived on control, on appearances, and on public shaming. They needed to hit her where it hurt the most, her meticulously crafted image. The bait was simple, a carefully placed "for sale" sign on Sarah's lawn. Not a real one, but a convincing replica, complete with a hastily scrawled phone number. It was prominently displayed right in the center of her new green lawn, slightly askew, deliberately tacky. It was a visual affront to Beatrice's obsession with Harmony Creek's curb appeal, and a clear signal that Sarah was giving up. Sarah and Martha then waited, watching the street. It took less than an hour. Beatrice's white SUV, which had been conspicuously absent from the street all morning, glided to a stop directly across from Sarah's house. Beatrice emerged, impeccable as always, but her face was a mask of incredulity and simmering rage. The "for sale" sign was an abomination to her carefully cultivated suburban tableau. Sarah watched on her phone, heart pounding, as Beatrice approached the sign. Her hands, encased in delicate gardening gloves, reached out. She tugged at it, trying to pull it from the ground. It was firmly stuck. Frustration contorted her features. She pulled harder, her face reddening. Then she looked around, furtively, as if expecting someone to materialize. Seeing no one, her expression hardened. With a grunt of effort, she wrapped both hands around the wooden stake and, with a vicious heave, ripped it from the ground. But as she did, a small silver object, previously hidden beneath the sign, sprang out. It was a miniature, motion-activated siren, loud and piercing, deliberately designed to sound like a malfunctioning car alarm. It blared into the quiet afternoon, echoing across the perfectly manicured lawns of Harmony Creek. Beatrice froze, the "for sale" sign clutched in her hands, the shrill alarm shattering the suburban peace. Her eyes darted wildly, her composure utterly shattered. Neighbors, drawn by the cacophony, began to peer from their windows. Old Mr. Henderson slowly opened his front door. The Millers stepped out onto their porch, Mark pulling out his phone, pretending to film the unusual disturbance. Beatrice, caught red-handed, a homeowner's worst nightmare, dropped the sign as if it were burning. The alarm continued its piercing shriek. She spun on her heel, her elegant retreat now a desperate, undignified scramble back to her SUV. She fumbled with the door handle, her face a mask of mortification, the siren's wail following her, a public testament to her petty vandalism. Sarah, watching the whole thing unfold on her phone, finally allowed herself to smile. A wide, genuine, victorious smile. The footage was crystal clear. The evidence was irrefutable. Beatrice Albright, the queen of Harmony Creek, had just been publicly unmasked, caught in the act of her own desperate, petty crime. The tables had turned irrevocably. The shrill, mocking shriek of the alarm continued to pierce the suburban calm, a relentless soundtrack to Beatrice Albright's public meltdown. Neighbors, initially drawn by curiosity, now openly stared, their faces a mixture of surprise, amusement, and a growing understanding. Old Mr. Henderson slowly closed his door, a faint smile playing on his lips. The Millers, phones discreetly recording, exchanged knowing glances. Beatrice, her perfectly coiffed hair slightly disheveled, fumbled with her car door, her movements frantic and undignified. She finally wrenched it open, dove inside, and peeled away from the curb with a screech of tires that was decidedly un-Harmony Creek-like, leaving the still blaring alarm as the only witness to her ignominious retreat. Sarah, still watching the live feed on her phone, allowed herself to laugh. It wasn't a triumphant cackle, but a deep, genuine release of tension, years of petty HOA tyranny bubbling up and bursting forth. She tapped her screen, and the miniature siren, its job done, fell silent. Within hours, the video footage, expertly uploaded by Mark Miller to Harmony Creek's unofficial community forum, a place where residents usually complained about recycling schedules or shared recipes, went viral. Not just in Harmony Creek, but surprisingly, in neighboring communities. HOA president caught vandalizing homeowner's lawn, screamed the headline on a local news blog that picked up the story. The grainy footage, despite the low light, clearly showed Beatrice Albright, the bastion of Harmony Creek's order, wrestling with a for sale sign and then fleeing in panic as the alarm shrieked. Her carefully constructed facade of serene authority shattered into a million pixels. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The next morning, the interim HOA board, undoubtedly pressured by a deluge of angry emails and phone calls from homeowners, held an emergency meeting. Beatrice Albright did not attend. Harold Finch, looking even more wilted than usual, announced her resignation with immediate effect, citing personal reasons. It was a thinly veiled euphemism for her very public downfall. The old board members, sensing the shift in the community's mood, quickly followed suit, leaving a power vacuum and a clear mandate for change. The whispers in Harmony Creek were no longer about Sarah Jenkins being a troublemaker. They were about Beatrice Albright being a tyrant, a hypocrite, and completely unhinged. The collective fear she had cultivated for years dissipated, replaced by a sense of liberation, almost giddy in its suddenness. People started talking to Sarah, sharing their own long-suppressed stories of Beatrice's absurd rules and petty intimidations. The forbidden pink flamingos, the unauthorized bird baths, the slightly too bright holiday lights. Sarah became, almost overnight, an accidental folk hero, the unlikely champion who had finally stood up to the neighborhood bully and won. Life in Harmony Creek began to change, subtly at first, then more profoundly. The HOA, now under the guidance of a new, genuinely elected board, Martha Rodriguez, to Sarah's amusement, was reluctantly nominated and elected president, became more transparent, more collaborative. Community meetings, once dreaded lectures, transformed into genuine discussions. The rigid adherence to conformity eased, replaced by a quiet celebration of individuality. Mrs. Henderson's gnomes reappeared, now proudly displayed. As for Sarah's lawn, it thrived. The new sod, carefully nurtured, slowly knitted together, erasing the last scars of the cactus invasion. Sarah, with newfound energy, began to plan. She didn't plant sunflowers, not yet. Instead, she chose a riot of native wildflowers, hardy and vibrant, a natural, defiant bloom against the rigid lines of the suburban landscape. They were beautiful, attracting bees and butterflies, a living testament to resilience. No one, not even the new HOA, dared to complain about their untidiness. One sunny afternoon, weeks later, Sarah was out in her garden, deadheading a particularly resilient coneflower. The street was quiet, peaceful. She glanced at Beatrice's house. It was on the market, a stark white for sale sign, a real one. This time, planted squarely in its manicured front lawn. The house, once a fortress of sterile perfection, now seemed forlorn, its curtains drawn, its windows dark. Beatrice, it was rumored, had moved to a senior living community several towns away, seeking a fresh start where her reputation was unknown. As Sarah turned back to her flowers, a faint rustling caught her ear. She looked down. At the very edge of her lawn, nestled among the new burgeoning wildflowers, a tiny, almost imperceptible green shoot was emerging from the soil. A single, small, perfectly formed cactus seedling, no bigger than her thumb, its minuscule spines glinting in the sun. It was a rogue survivor, a final ironic thorn from her ordeal. Sarah paused, looking at it. She could pull it out, stomp on it, erase the last vestige of Beatrice's malice. But then, a different thought struck her. She bent down, gently clearing away the surrounding soil. This tiny plant, against all odds, had survived. It was a reminder, not of bitterness, but of resilience. A quirky, unexpected part of her story. She smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. She left it there, a quiet, spiny monument to the war she had won and the unexpected freedom she had found.